Well, hello and welcome to session 5 of the Roots and Fruits course. We're moving on to a new route today. Very exciting. So we've looked at knowing God, we've looked at knowing ourselves. We're going to look at knowing others, or being more specific, cultivating life-giving relationships. That's our subject for today. And we've talked about this idea of if we want to produce fruit, we need our roots to be strong. We need strong roots and we need strong life-giving relationships in our lives in order that we can produce more fruit. And so we know our main life giver is God. We talked about remaining in him and producing fruit through remaining in him. But he's placed us in community. He's placed us in relationship. It says this in Ecclesiastes 4:12, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And in Galatians 6 verse 2 it says this, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And there's loads more we could look at in the Bible. It's full of messages and information about God's people being together. And it assumes that God's people are together in community, loving one another. That's the New Testament commands are predicated on that point. But before we look at this in more detail, I want you to, as we normally do, just get into groups of 3 or 4 for 5 minutes and have a brief discussion, just to whet appetite, just to get ourselves going. Here's the question. It's a bit morbid, but I'll explain why we're doing it afterwards. Who do you think will turn up at your funeral and why? I don't want a whole list of everyone, but I want you to talk about people you know will be there, people you're not sure will be there, and why that'd be the case. Okay? See you in 5 minutes. Well, that might have sounded a bit morbid, but it was meant to get you thinking about the depth of relationship that you have with people. In other words, most people think that there'll be loads of people at a funeral, but actually it's not always the case. Why is that? Because we sometimes overemphasize the level of friendship that we have, or we overweigh the depth of them, if you like. And why do we do that? Well, let me make a suggestion. I don't think I'm an expert on this, but let me make a suggestion. I think that we've diluted the meaning of true friendship. And we've settled for something less than God would have us have, less life-giving than it could be. I think we've settled for superficiality when God has got deep and meaningful relationships in mind for us. So what would I define as true friendship? It's only my definition. There's lots of other definitions. Let me put my definition out there. It's to be fully known and to know others. It's letting down the fortress and the portcullis and allowing people into who you are and into your life. It's honesty and openness. It's being real. It's dropping any pretense. It's reveling in and exercising agape, sacrificial, accepting love. And if you were here for the last session, you started doing a bit of that, didn't you? You gave a little bit of yourself. You explained where your failings were, where you'd fallen short. And that's part of friendship. A little bit of friendship is opening ourselves up and being honest with other people. So we're going to spend a few minutes looking at how we can develop these types of friendships, and look at what stops us from doing that. So, true friendships. Well, if you're married, then I'm hoping that you've got a true friendship with your spouse. We can't assume it's the case. But I encourage you, God has given you that marriage relationship to develop true and deep friendship. So you can be totally known and totally loved at the same time. And also if you're married, of course, having friends of the same sex outside of marriage, having deep relationship with them is so important as well. We'll come back to that a bit. If you're single, there's a slightly different call on you. In fact, to have a marriage type friendship, a one-on-one exclusive relationship where you're mutually dependent is probably unhealthy. And I'll touch on that a little bit later on. The encouragement for you guys is to develop a broad and rich friendships amongst people. developing deep trust and deep knowledge of one another's faults and failings and love of people through that. And we have to remember, unlike unlike marriage, it's not covenantal. So these friendships will change over time. They won't stay the same, which makes them harder to manage and probably introduces a level of disappointment, and therefore are probably, arguably, harder to keep up, but they're still worth pursuing. Irrespective of our relationship status, there's still a call on us to grow in this area, to put our roots down in terms of friendship. We are to invest in friendships through opening up and being honest and being loved. And this gives us life because it builds us up. It allows us to share our burdens. It allows us to encourage one another into the things of God. But if you've lived long enough on this world, you'll know that it's not quite as simple as that, is it? It's not quite as straightforward as that. In fact, you could be convinced of the importance of true friendship, but have no real true friends. So why is that? Well, it's because there are lots of barriers in the way. There are things that stop us from pursuing that. The things that make relationships and friendships difficult. Let me mention some of them. Self-protection. We don't want to get hurt. You've invested in a friendship before and you got hurt. Self-protection can stop us. Fear of rejection. Low self-esteem, feeling like you don't have anything to give. Or there could be an element of self-obsession. Friendships don't deepen because you don't invest in them, because you're more obsessed with talking about yourself than you are about the other person. The lack of inequality can sometimes affect the deepness of a relationship. If you give into a relationship and get nothing back, it won't develop into that deep, open and honest relationship. And it could also be a lack of time. Friendships take time. If we're busy, we're going to struggle to have deep friendships. And that could also be indicative of a lack of value on friendships, or a lack of prioritization. We're so busy, we're prioritizing everything else, but not friendship. You'll get a chance to chat through some of these things a little bit later, but for now, I want us to recognize that our barriers, it's not simple, it's not straightforward. And that barriers can work the other way, that other people put up barriers to prevent us from developing deep friendships and relationships with them. And this requires us to be full of the grace of God so we don't get bitter. To give people the benefit of the doubt. And to keep loving people even when you don't feel loved. There's risks and there's barriers. So we need to be convinced that the risks are worth it, that the barriers are worth taking down. And this is my conviction, and this is what I'd encourage you to get hold of today. It's God's design and God's plan for us to have deep roots in this area, for life to flow, for us to be sharpened, for us to be more like Jesus, for us to have life-giving relationships will take us to a new place in terms of fruitfulness. So, how do we deepen friendships? How do we get those sort of relationships? How do we cultivate life-giving relationships? I have some thoughts. You may have some thoughts later you want to share. If you're convinced it's a good idea, let's try and make it happen. Okay. First tip, be a good friend to good friends. If you count someone a good friend, make sure you're a good friend back. Reciprocate. What do they do to me that make me feel a good friend? I'll do that back to them. Or another way of looking at it is invest in those people who invest in you. Real friendships are more balanced. Different types of friendships are helpful as well. It doesn't have to be totally deep and meaningful to be life-giving the whole time. There may be some people you're just so comfortable with, you can just hang out with them, and that produces life in a different way. Another one, don't get too upset if friendships change, because they will. Life, circumstances, time commitments, geography, all these can affect our relationships. And if you expect a friendship to always be the same, you're going to be disappointed. Now, if it's a friendship worth fighting for, fight for it. But sometimes things just move on and you can't do anything about it. Or alternatively, the frequency of seeing someone reduces, but you can still maintain that depth of relationship. Another tip, be aware that the amount of friends that you have decreases over time. That is, kind of sounds discouraging, but it's encouraging in the sense that If you feel like you used to have loads of friends and you don't, that's probably most people's experience, but make sure you're investing in the friendships you do have. Or another way of putting it, it means that the older people that are around us are more likely to require friendship. There's an opportunity there to build friendships with people that are older than us. Invest in friendships outside of church. We are kind of talking about friendships within church, and there's a certain depth that you can only go to with those people who know Jesus, because our faith is so integral to who we are. But there's also opportunity to do life and share life and develop and cultivate life-giving relationships with people outside of church as well. We need to do a bit of work on that. But there are opportunities. Let's not just make it about people in the church. We'll do that next session. We'll talk about the importance of that next session. But I just want to throw that in there for now. Beware the best friend syndrome. I touched on this a bit earlier. There seems to be a bit of a culture, particularly in the younger generation, maybe definitely your teenagers, but your 20s and 30s, where there's this desire to have a bestie, a BFF, best friend forever. Well, it's not a biblical idea, is it really? And we are wanting deep relationships. We're not pursuing best friends forever. Okay? And actually, when you get best friends forever, there can be mutual dependency, which actually becomes unhealthy. I hope that makes sense. You can chat about it and work out yourself together, if not. If you don't know where to start with your small group at church, start with your link group. Start with whatever group you're involved with. Build friendships, invite them around for tea, go for a walk. Ask them questions, answer questions, be open, be honest. And also here, pray about it. Sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes we don't. Pray about it. Get faith for it. Pray for your friends, pray for your friendships. Such an important area of life. So, over to you guys now. We've touched on a big area, but we've only just touched on it. And for some of you, this may be a sore point. You maybe find friendships hard. And I'm hoping today will be helpful for you. I'm hoping this isn't proving to be difficult for you to talk about. So let's proceed with caution and care with one another, but get back into your groups of 3 and 4 and look at the following questions. Are deep friendships something you actively pursue and cultivate? Why? Do you have a set of deep friendships? Who are they? And why do you count them as true friends? If you don't at the moment, or you can think about people more generally that don't, what barriers prevent us from developing friendships? And finally, are there some specific actions that you need to take forward on the back of today's session? So 20 minutes or so to discuss that. Your facilitator will bring you back at the right time and we'll finish off together in a bit. Right, for now, pause the video. So route 3, part 1 done, cultivating life-giving friendships. I hope there's something in there you found helpful, inspirational, that's challenged you. And actually, I think deep down, we all want these life-giving relationships in operation in our life. It helps us to be more like God wants us to be, and it helps us to produce fruit. And it happens as we hear God through their encouragements, and we know his love through their expressions of affection, and we're refined by God through them as they challenge us. And of course, it works the other way around too. It's a key route. It's one worth valuing, investing in, putting energy and time into it. So I encourage you to cultivate deep and life-giving relationships. Next week, we're going to continue looking at relationships, but we're going to specifically look at it in the context of church life. Something to look forward to. For now, have a great time. See you later.